October 1957, New York City, a press conference. Frank Sinatra sat at a table surrounded by reporters. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones crowded the space in front of him. He was 41 years old, the chairman of the board, the voice, the biggest star in America for 20 years, until Elvis Presley came along. A reporter raised his hand. "Frank, what do you think about Elvis Presley?" The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was a loaded question. Elvis was everywhere, on every radio, every TV screen, every magazine cover. He was the new king, and Frank Sinatra was not happy about it. Sinatra leaned back. He took a drag from his cigarette. Then he spoke. "Rock and roll," he said slowly, "is the most brutal, ugly, desperate, vicious form of expression it has been my misfortune to hear." The reporters scribbled furiously. Sinatra continued. "It's sung, played, and written for the most part by cretinous goons, and by means of its almost imbecilic reiteration and sly, lewd, in plain fact, dirty lyrics, it manages to be the martial music of every sideburn delinquent on the face of the earth." He paused. "Let the words sink in. This rancid-smelling aphrodisiac I deplore." The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Frank Sinatra had just declared war on rock and roll, and on Elvis Presley. But what Sinatra didn't know was that 3 years later he'd be standing on stage with Elvis, singing together, and changing his mind completely. In 1956, Elvis Presley was 21 years old. He'd just released Heartbreak Hotel. It was #1 for 8 weeks. Then came Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender. Hit after hit after hit. Elvis was changing music, changing culture, changing everything, and the old guard hated it. Frank Sinatra wasn't alone in his criticism. Bing Crosby called rock and roll garbage. Dean Martin said it was noise. The entire establishment was against it. But Sinatra was the loudest, the most vocal, the most vicious. In interviews, he'd attack Elvis specifically. "He's nothing," Sinatra would say. "He can't sing. He just gyrates. It's not music. It's just movement." When reporters told Elvis what Sinatra was saying, Elvis didn't respond publicly. But privately, it hurt. "I grew up listening to Frank Sinatra," Elvis told his friends. "He was one of my heroes. And now he's tearing me apart in the press." "Why do you think he hates you?" someone asked. Elvis shrugged. "Because I'm young, and he's not." But it was more than that. Frank Sinatra wasn't just attacking Elvis. He was attacking what Elvis represented. Change, youth, the future. And Sinatra wasn't ready for the future. Not yet. By 1958, Elvis was at the peak of his career. He was selling millions of records, starring in movies, the biggest star in the world. Then, in March 1958, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. For 2 years, Elvis disappeared from the public eye. No concerts, no TV appearances, no new music, just letters from Germany where he was stationed. During those 2 years, something interesting happened. The rock and roll craze started to fade. Not completely, but enough that the older generation started to relax, and Frank Sinatra started to reconsider. In 1959, Sinatra was approached by ABC. They wanted to do a special TV program. Welcome Home Elvis, a show celebrating Elvis's return from the Army. The network wanted Sinatra to host it. At first, Sinatra said no. "I'm not celebrating that kid." But his daughter, Nancy Sinatra, convinced him. "Dad, you should do it. Elvis is huge. This show will get massive ratings, and maybe you'll change your mind about him." Sinatra thought about it. Then he agreed, but not because he liked Elvis, because he saw an opportunity. If he could publicly embrace Elvis, maybe he could stay relevant. Maybe he could bridge the gap between the old generation and the new. So in December 1959, the deal was made. The Frank Sinatra Timex show, Welcome Home Elvis, would air in May 1960. But nobody knew what would happen when the two finally met. May 12th, 1960. Miami Beach, Florida. The Fontainebleau Hotel. Elvis Presley arrived at the hotel where the show would be filmed. He was nervous. More nervous than he'd been in years. He was about to meet Frank Sinatra, the man who'd called his music garbage, the man who'd attacked him for 4 years. Elvis walked into the hotel. Sinatra's people greeted him, cold, professional. They led him to a dressing room. "Mr. Sinatra will see you shortly," they said. Elvis sat in the dressing room, waiting. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what to expect. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Elvis said. The door opened. Frank Sinatra walked in. He was shorter than Elvis expected, 5'7", but he carried himself like he was 10 feet tall. Sharp suit, perfectly combed hair, a cigarette in one hand, a drink in the other. He looked at Elvis for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Sinatra extended his hand. "Elvis?" Elvis stood up, shook his hand. "Mr. Sinatra." "Call me Frank." They sat down. An awkward silence filled the room. Finally, Sinatra spoke. "I said some things about you, in the press." "I know," Elvis said quietly. "I was wrong." Elvis looked up, surprised. Sinatra took a drag from his cigarette. "I was angry. You were young, talented, and you were taking over. I didn't like it, so I attacked you." "Why are you telling me this?" Elvis asked. "Because I want you to know. This show tonight, it's not just for the ratings. I want to do this right. I want to show respect." Elvis nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." Sinatra smiled. A small, genuine smile. "You're a hell of a performer, kid. I've watched your stuff. You've got something. Something real." "Thank you," Elvis said. "That means a lot. Coming from you." They talked for another 20 minutes, about music, about the army, about life, and by the end of the conversation, something had shifted. They weren't friends, not yet, but they weren't enemies anymore. That night, the show aired live. Millions of people watched. Frank Sinatra opened the show with his usual charm. Then he introduced Elvis. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome home, Elvis Presley." The audience erupted. Elvis walked onto the stage. He looked sharp, army uniform, clean-cut, handsome. Sinatra shook his hand. They stood there for a moment. 2 generations, 2 styles, 2 legends. Then they performed. First, Elvis sang "Fame and Fortune" and "Stuck on You." The audience went wild. Elvis was back. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The duet, Sinatra and Elvis, together, on stage. They decided to switch songs. Sinatra would sing one of Elvis's songs, and Elvis would sing one of Sinatra's. Sinatra sang "Love Me Tender," slow, smooth, in his signature style. Then Elvis sang "Witchcraft," one of Sinatra's classics, and he nailed it. Smooth, cool, perfect. The audience couldn't believe it. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley, singing each other's songs, respecting each other's styles. When the duet ended, they shook hands again, and this time it wasn't awkward. It was genuine. Backstage, after the show, Sinatra found Elvis. "You did good, kid." "You too," Elvis said. "Maybe I was wrong about rock and roll," Sinatra admitted. "Maybe there's room for both of us." Elvis smiled. "There's always room, Frank." And that was the beginning of something unexpected. Not a friendship, but a mutual respect. Over the next few years, Sinatra and Elvis didn't see each other often. They moved in different circles, different worlds, but they kept track of each other. In 1961, Elvis was in Hollywood filming movies. Sinatra was in Las Vegas performing. They'd occasionally cross paths at industry events. One night, at a party in Los Angeles, they ran into each other again. They talked, laughed, drank, and by the end of the night, they were joking like old friends. "You know what the difference between us is?" Sinatra asked. "What?" Elvis said. "I sing to the women. You make them scream." Elvis laughed. "Is that a bad thing?" Sinatra grinned. "Hell no, that's genius." In 1965, Elvis invited Sinatra to visit the set of one of his movies. Sinatra showed up, watched Elvis work. Afterward, he told him, "You're wasting your talent on these movies. You should get back to music." "I know," Elvis said, "but the Colonel wants me to keep making movies." "Screw the Colonel," Sinatra said. "You're Elvis Presley, do what you want." But Elvis didn't take the advice, not yet. By the late 1960s, Sinatra's career was slowing down. Rock and roll had completely taken over. The younger generation didn't care about crooners anymore. They wanted guitars. They wanted rebellion. Sinatra watched as Elvis struggled too. The movies were terrible. The music was stale. Elvis was losing himself. In 1968, when Elvis staged his comeback special, Sinatra watched it on TV. He called Elvis the next day. "That was incredible," Sinatra said. "That's the Elvis I remember. The real one." "Thanks, Frank," Elvis said. "I needed to hear that." "Don't lose yourself again," Sinatra said. "The world needs the real you." The 1970s were hard for both of them. Sinatra was in his 50s. Elvis was in his 40s. The world had moved on, but they were still performing, still fighting to stay relevant. In 1971, Elvis was performing in Las Vegas. Sinatra was also in town. They met for dinner. "How are you holding up?" Sinatra asked. "I'm tired," Elvis admitted. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." "I get it," Sinatra said. "I feel the same way. But you can't quit. You're Elvis. The world needs you." "The world has moved on," Elvis said quietly. "No," Sinatra said firmly. "The world never moves on from legends. Trust me." They talked late into the night about their careers, their regrets, their fears. "Do you regret what you said about me?" Elvis asked. "Back in '57? Sinatra was quiet for a moment. "Every day." "Why?" "Because I was jealous. I saw you coming up. Young, talented, taking my spot. And I couldn't handle it, so I attacked you. But you didn't deserve it. You were just being yourself." Elvis nodded. "I forgave you a long time ago, Frank." "I know," Sinatra said. "But I never forgave myself." They finished their drinks, shook hands, and went their separate ways. That was the last time they spoke. August 16th, 1977. Elvis Presley died. Frank Sinatra was at his home in Palm Springs when he heard the news. Someone called him, told him Elvis was gone. Sinatra didn't say anything. He just hung up the phone, sat down, and stared at the wall. His daughter Nancy found him an hour later. "Dad, are you okay?" "Elvis is dead," Sinatra said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry." "He was 42 years old," Sinatra said. 42. That's too young." "Did you guys stay in touch?" Nancy asked. Sinatra shook his head. "Not really. But I always kept track of him. I always cared." Nancy sat next to her father. "You changed your mind about him. That's what matters." "I should have told him more," Sinatra said. "I should have told him how much I respected him, how much I admired him." "I think he knew," Nancy said. But Sinatra wasn't sure. A few days later, a reporter called Sinatra for a statement about Elvis's death. Sinatra thought for a moment. Then he said, "There have been many accolades uttered about Elvis's talent and performances through the years, all of which are true. But I shall remember him most as a kind, generous, and wonderful human being. The world has lost a great talent and a beautiful person." When the interview was over, Sinatra sat alone in his office. He pulled out an old photo from 1960. The two of them on stage, shaking hands, smiling. He stared at the photo for a long time. "I'm sorry, kid," he whispered. "I'm sorry I was an ass. You deserved better." He put the photo away, and he never spoke about Elvis publicly again. Frank Sinatra died on May 14th, 1998. He was 82 years old. In his later years, people would ask him about Elvis, about their relationship, about the things he'd said in the 1950s. Sinatra would always say the same thing. I was wrong. Elvis was brilliant. He changed music. He changed culture, and I was too old and too stubborn to see it at first. But you eventually did, someone once said. Yeah, Sinatra replied, but not soon enough. Today, when people talk about Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra, they remember them as two of the greatest entertainers of all time. Different styles, different eras, but equal legends. What most people don't know is the complicated relationship they had, the rivalry, the respect, the regret. Frank Sinatra started as Elvis's biggest critic. He called rock and roll garbage. He called Elvis a delinquent. He attacked everything Elvis represented. But in 1960, something changed. They met. They performed together. And Sinatra realized he was wrong. From that moment on, Sinatra never publicly criticized Elvis again. In fact, he became one of Elvis's quiet supporters. But he never got to fully make amends, and that haunted him until the day he died. Because here's the truth, Frank Sinatra wasn't jealous of Elvis's talent. He was jealous of his youth, his freedom, his ability to break all the rules. Sinatra had spent his entire career playing by the rules, being polished, being perfect. And then Elvis came along and threw all the rules out the window, and Sinatra hated him for it, until he understood it, until he respected it. By then it was too late. Elvis was gone, and Sinatra was left with regret. Two kings, two generations, one hidden war, and in the end, mutual respect. But it came at a cost. Time, pride, words left unsaid. Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. They never became best friends, but they became something more important. They became each other's bridge between the past and the future. Sinatra represented the old guard, elegance, class, tradition. Elvis represented the new wave, rebellion, freedom, change. And for one night in 1960, they stood together on stage and showed the world that both could coexist. That's the legacy, not the rivalry, not the criticism, but the moment when two legends put their egos aside and respected each other's greatness. Frank Sinatra spent years attacking Elvis Presley. Then he spent the rest of his life regretting it. And maybe that's the real story. Not about music, not about fame, but about pride, and what it costs us when we refuse to see the greatness in others. Elvis forgave Sinatra, but Sinatra never forgave himself. That's the hidden war, not between two men, but within one man's heart, and it lasted until the day he died.